Today, September 22nd, is the first anniversary of EMBCA. We're proud to have had some fantastic events last year and to start off the new year with another fantastic event relating to archiving Hellenic American history and archives both nationally and locally. Today's focus is on Queens College and the fact that part of their library is going to be dedicated to Hellenic American studies. And we're going to have Professor Kitoeff speak on archives in general throughout the country. We're going to have George Tselos, who is the chief archivist at Ellis Island, to speak on the Ellis Island records. And we're also going to have Dr. Alexiou, who's putting together the Hellenic American Project at Queens College. We're very honored to have them. We're also honored by the fact that the Prime Minister of Greece, Alexis Tsipras, is attending the event. He thinks it's important to link up the archives of Greece and the archives of the United States in terms of Hellenic American studies. So it'll be a great night, and I'm glad you're here. Join us and join our future events. Thank you. This is an anniversary for us, for EMBCA. We're 1 year old. So last September we started actually with a series of programs that quite frankly were quite different, quite fantastic. Some of you have been to our events before. We've done various type of events, which include musical concerts. For example, last year, this past year with Professor Alexiou, we did a Hellenic Blues, Harlem Blues concert where we had Rebetiko music and Harlem blues music playing at the same time. So we've done a series of different things, unusual things, and we intend to continue what we started last year with a series of various programs. This program, the genesis of it had to do with something we had set up for last year, which was going to be in May. We were going to do the second annual Hellenic American Genealogy Conference in Chicago at the Hellenic Museum of Chicago. It didn't work out with the museum. So what we decided to do is set up this particular program where we were actually going to do some of the presentations that were going to be made in May. So Professor Alexiou is going to make a presentation, Professor Kitoeff, and George Tselos. As the year progressed, and as Professor Alexiou started to go into the oral history project with me, and I visited with him at Queens College, and then he introduced the concept of what was taking place at Queens College. In other words, taking a portion of the library to dedicate it to archives, Hellenic archives. It started to spin this particular program a little bit differently. And that's why when we sent out some of the information of what was going to take place today, we actually turned it around. And if you see your program, now we're just going to talk about archives in general. And we still have obviously the same speakers. And we're glad to do this particular program. We're going to do a few announcements, like I said, besides, I imagine the Prime Minister will want to say a few words also. Okay, so we'll do that. So again, the program, we're going to reverse it slightly. So we're going to start tonight with the presentation by Dr. Kitoeff on the Greek American archives and heritage preservation throughout the United States. Professor Kitoeff is someone that I've known for a few years. He was actually my son's professor at Haverford, and has been involved with a lot of very interesting things, which he'll go into tonight.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to speak tonight about this very important project at Queens College. What I want to do is, I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story about my travels around the United States. Over the past 3 years, I've been researching and writing about the history of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, the major institution of Greek America. And of my research, I've been traveling to archives, Greek American archives, and I've also been lecturing, invited by several Greek American communities. And this privilege has afforded me a kind of wonderful overview of the many varied efforts that the Greek Americans are undertaking right this moment in different ways to preserve their heritage and to preserve their history. And this is what I want to share with you this evening. I need not tell this audience, I think, how important such preservation initiatives are. This is a country of ethnic pluralism, and whether we like it or not, our identity, our public image, our public standing, the way other people see us depends on part of our ethnicity. We are tagged with our ethnicity, and what we do with our ethnic heritage, how we respect it, how we live it, is part of the way that we are judged. And I'm not talking about doing some kind of hagiographical thing, an exercise that will focus only on the positive contributions of the Greeks, or say that it was all good, all of the Greek experience was an unalloyed trajectory from rags to riches. Quite the opposite. There's a wonderful variety which makes it much more real and attuned with other ethnic groups. I can share with you one anecdote. I was researching about the Greek enclave in Upper Derby outside Philadelphia, and I found out that there were some Upper Derby Greeks who had become involved with the Italian mafia in South Philadelphia. And I was trying to find some information about the Greeks. And a friend of mine actually located someone who had some unspecified close connection with those activities. And so my friend said, would you be willing to talk to the professor? But because of my name, people confuse. They say Kitoeff, they don't know whether he's Greek or not. So he says, this person who had the connection with the Italian mafia asks, Kitoeff, is he Greek? Because I'm only going to talk to a Greek because I wouldn't want to help someone say bad things about our community. There he was, having gotten involved with the Italian mafia, but he heaven forbid that he gave some information which would be bad for our community. I never got to talk to him because he got cold feet, but I'm still pursuing him, and it'll give an interesting dimension to that. The Greeks did everything, from those things to the good things and everything in between. That's the richness, that's the reality, and that's what we have to preserve. And how we treat our past tells us about ourselves and our present. Now let me just say also that my interest in collecting and saving material connected with the Greek American community and its history dates back almost 30 years when I first came to the United States, having studied in England, and I met George Tselos, and we started the first little project out of Queen's College. At that time, there was very little response. I think it was the 1980s. The US had gone through the 1970s, there was a ethnic revival, and then the 1980s people changed. They had enough of ethnic revival. It was morning in America, and we were looking forward, according to President Reagan. And ethnicity kind of fell off the radar. And that was the time we started, and it didn't gain any traction. I think for different reasons that we can't go into now, I think heritage is more valued, and this is a propitious time for these type of initiatives. I'm focused this evening on Greek America's efforts to preserve the past, but it bears mentioning that many historical societies and libraries throughout the country have Greek American holdings. We made good use of those holdings and many photographs when I was collaborating with director Maria Iliou for a documentary called The Journey, The Greek American Dream, that came out in 2007. We found very many rare photographs in historical societies all over the country. The truth is, though, that historical societies and universities moving away from printed material and into the electronic age are likely not to pay much attention to the Greek material unless there's a local community there pushing, visiting, expressing some kind of interest. That's very important to say. There's one exception, the University of Minnesota, which started an immigration archive because of an ethnic historian of the immigration experience, Rudy Vacoli, and he got one major Greek American archive. Many of you will have heard the name of Theodore Salutos, the author of the classic study, The Greeks in America, 1964, out of print, but still the gold standard, along with Charles Moskos's work, the two major works on Greek American history. At the moment in Minnesota, and I was there a year ago, there's the Salutos archive and the Dimitrios Kallimachos archive. Kallimachos was an editor of the Ethnikos Kyrgyz for many decades, and it's quite moving, emotional. You know, you're there in Minnesota, there's not a very big Hellenic presence, you go on the campus, it's a kind of, you know, Midwestern huge urban campus, and you go into the archives, and in those archives you find information about our history, Salutos and Kallimachos, two major figures. That is the exception. Everywhere else, the Greek Americans have to push a little bit to ensure those archives are preserved and are not shipped off to off-site basements, etc. One good example is Sacramento. At the California State University of Sacramento, there is an important Greek archive. There are the papers of Vassos Vladianos, an editor of the Ethnikos Kyrgyz from 1939 to 1947. And the Vladianos papers went to Professor Briones, and Professor Briones, who was out there in California, gave them to the university at Sacramento. The reason why this place in Sacramento, of all places, has got this trove of information is because a local Greek businessman, Angelo Takokulos, has given money to the library, has created a Tsakopoulos collection room, and is a donor to the library. And the fact Mr. Tsakopoulos' presence in Sacramento ensures that the library and the archives there are on the lookout for Greek American stuff and preserve Greek American stuff. I should mention, aside from Vladianos' archives, they're the archives of his wife, Katie Vladianou, who was very active in the Philoptochos organization of the Holy Trinity Cathedral here in New York. So it's an extensive, impressive archive. So that's an example of a kind of community influencing university, and you get a Greek American archive up and running. As far as the archives that I have seen, the archive of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese is by far the most impressive. The Archdiocese has preserved its material since the time of its establishment. It was established in 1921 and incorporated in 1922 and was based in Astoria, moved to Manhattan. They've kept all their archives, but significantly, the Archdiocese had to rely on outside help to organize its archive. It's thanks to the Nyakusa Foundation. The Nyakusa Foundation came along, saw the archive, realized that paper can be destroyed. This is an active archive, it's in the basement, it's not in a climate-controlled situation that it would be in a university, because they're using the stuff for getting their history and helping parishes, etc. So the Nyakusa Foundation realized that the paper would be destroyed sooner or later, funded a massive scanning operation. And now all the archives of the Archdiocese are in PDF files and available. Not quite everything is available. You can't see personal files of priests. I mean, there's a protocol that governs the archives, but a lot is available. And because of this, the significance of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, that archive speaks to not only ecclesiastical history, but the history of the community. But this is, let's call this Model 1, a Greek-American institution that's done a fantastic job of preserving its archives. I'm not sure that all of them have done that. I think AHEPA has done quite a good job. There was an earlier organization called GAPA. It's finished its activities, it wound down before anyone saved anything, and you've got to go all over the place picking up bits and pieces. So Greek-American institutions should model themselves on the Archdiocese as a model if we're going to be able to use their material in the future. Model 2, the Hellenic Culture and Heritage Society of Lowell, Massachusetts. Lowell, Massachusetts, one of the most historic centers of a Greek presence. You know, all Greeks go around trying to tell you, you know, this was a Greek town, you know, Tarpon Springs, Greek, you know, Lowell, there's a moment in which the Greeks in Lowell are about 40%, so with a little bit of creative shifting around of the statistics, Lowell, Greek town. Not quite, not quite. There were a lot of Irish there as well, but it's historic. And what the people of Lowell have done is they've gathered the material. They haven't got a space, they haven't got a museum, they haven't got an archive. What they've done is they put it on Facebook. There is a Facebook, the page is called the Acropolis of America. It's a lovely title. This is what Lowell considered itself, the Acropolis της Αμερικής. The problem, so there are advantages and disadvantages, because with the Facebook, you get stuff on the web and then you can access it. The problem is, of course, that it's a bit random. They kind of just generally put things out as they think of it. There's no kind of systematic thing. There are a couple of histories of Lowell. Historian Nikolas Alexiou has written a couple. So you do that. It's a kind of strange thing, but it works. It's there. It's being preserved because it is on Facebook. There's a problem working with it because it's not organized. But there you go. There's Model 2. That's what the folks in Lowell did, and you know, we thank them for them. It's a very impressive initiative. A third model is the one in Philadelphia, Model 3. It combines the two I've spoken about. There's something called the Greek-American Heritage Society of Philadelphia. They don't have a building. They rent from one of the local churches. But what they're doing is they're trying to gather that information, and they're also engaged in oral interviews that Nikolas is doing. But they don't have the resources to do them, so they rely on a local Philadelphia-based Greek news website, a for-profit organization called kosmosphili.com. So Kosmosphili goes and interviews people, you know, whatever it is, priests in the area, old Greek Americans in the greater Philadelphia area, and we have a kind of hybrid situation in Philadelphia. We've got the archives in rented accommodation in the church, and it works and it doesn't work. There are some researchers trying to process them. I should note, the archives, the core of the archives, are the papers of the first church in Philadelphia, the Evangelismos, and the reason we have them was that Evangelismos was moving to the suburbs, so what do you do, of course, with all this old paper? You leave it on the sidewalk, of course, and fortunately some parishioners saw the boxes of papers and realized that they should keep them, and they've been preserved, and that's the core of the, you go back to minutes from the early 1900s about the church in Philadelphia and the community. So you've got those archives and you've got oral web stuff. It's a particular way. As long as those two organizations are working and talking to each other, the Philadelphia project is in good hands and is doing well. But you know, here we have a third example of what is going on. And finally, a fourth model of preserving Greek archives and Greek material. A library. That's it. It's just a library. It's a privately owned library, incorporated, which is somewhere in a suburb of Los Angeles. It's the initiative of Philippos Terevizas, a retired economics professor who has gathered 4,500 to 5,000 volumes on Greek American and Greek history. He has rented accommodation in a suburb of South Los Angeles. It's called the Hellenic Library of Southern California. The accommodation has been rented from another Greek American who has a business there that is giving him the room. I'm kind of coloring my voice and speaking a bit slower because it's very tenuous. I was there in the summer. It's amazing. You know, I mean, no offense to Los Angeles, but you're driving in the middle of South Los Angeles, the last thing you think of is Greeks and Greekness. And then you stop in this building and he opens the door and the walls are just lined with books. On the shelves, there's 2 rows of books on each shelf, every single book on Greek history, classical, Byzantine, Ottoman, Greek American history, the stuff that they have in the Greek fairs, you know, the books that they produce, Orthodoxos Paratiritis, Ethnikos Kyrix, Atlantis magazine. It's amazing. 5,000 items in a rented accommodation in Los Angeles. Philippos has got a little organization. They organize cultural activities, and they are trying to, and they're gathering more and more books, but of course they're looking for ways in which they can buy their own property to ensure that this collection is not lost. And long term, of course, as we know, those books have to be scanned because otherwise, sooner or later, they won't exist. And scanning the way that, and kind of closing the circle, the way the Nyakusa Foundation realized that the only way the Archdiocese's archives could be preserved could be through scanning. The library in the Hellenic Library of Southern California is acutely aware of the fact that these books have to be scanned, otherwise in 10, 15 years or even earlier, they might get lost. That is my short panorama. There is no, usually I have a theme to my talks, but I have specially come this evening without a theme, without a central idea, quite the reverse. I've come to show you the breadth of the landscape, the wonderful initiative that volunteers, well-meaning volunteers and others have engaged. I spoke about these 4 because, and the Minnesota and Sacramento, because I have direct experience. If you Google Hellenic Society of, you will find out, Hellenic Heritage Society, you'll find others. There are many others in the United States at the moment. No, we're not going to do that. But to coordinate, with George Tselos' help, to give some kind of idea of the archives protocols, to coordinate the effort, to bring everyone together, to collaborate, and in that way, this wonderful breadth will remain rich in its variety, but it will acquire a central theme, which will ultimately lead to the preservation of Greek American heritage and history. Thanks so much.
why we're here tonight is to centralize that theme. Okay, as Professor Kitoeff indicated, there are different collections in different places. We're here to talk about archiving the Hellenic American experience, Hellenic American archives in the 21st century. Obviously, a lot of this has to do with digitizing all those collections. And one of the things that I'm proposing this evening, and I'm going to continue to propose, and I'll have some other ideas as we go through the evening, is to basically search out, and I had a discussion with George Tselos actually a couple of days ago, and he had indicated that he would like to be involved in a scenario where he works after he retires to actually go through all the various archives and basically put them down. Where are they? Where do they exist? What do they have in those archives? But I'm suggesting something even more. What I'm suggesting is that we in fact do a project. Hopefully Queens College will be part of that, where we start to digitize all these different archives in all these different locations, not to take the books, not to take their records, certainly with their approval, but basically to digitize them and allow them then to link up where people will have access to these particular records. As many of you know, I have been involved, I got involved in Hellenic American genealogy. And the genealogists, I have to say, are far advanced in terms of finding out records, in terms of where their people were, at any particular point in time. And what they're doing actually is they have the Hellenic records, okay, which are the National Archives of Greece, and the American records, which relate to what George Tselos is going to talk about in a second. Now, Ellis Island records are obviously invaluable because anyone who, and all of us are basically immigrants, we can basically search out their records and see when our ancestors came, what year they came, what boat they were in, who was traveling with them, and a lot of other details that are very important to people who are struggling to find out something about their background and their history. And we're going to go a little bit further on that. I'll just indicate a couple of things. In terms of the lull, being on Facebook, in a lot of cases they don't know what they have. Because in many cases, as you know, they put out a picture and they say, does anyone know who these people are? Does anyone know where this particular scene is? And I think as we start pulling these records together, we can actually start to indicate where these things are coming from and all the rest of that. Lowell happens to be the place where it's the first ground-up Orthodox church that was built in America in a Byzantine fashion. In about 1906, I think 1908 is when it was built. I'm going to introduce someone who is just a fantastic person. I mean, he's known as the memories guardian. He has that reputation. He's obviously sitting on a lot of archives that are extremely valuable. And the first time I ever had any discussion with George was one day when I was trying to find some records on a newspaper article that related to the Greek thugs. In Hellenic American history, one of the most interesting things was a raid that took place by the immigration group in February 6th of 1898. And I had read that in one of the books that was written. They talked about different people. I read the book maybe 2 or 3 times. It had to do with the Greek Americans in New York up to 1910 by another famous Kondopoulos, who, if he was alive, would have been one of the geniuses, in my opinion, of Hellenic American history. But I read the book 2 or 3 times. Fascinating book. Before computers, he did analyses, newspaper articles, all types of things. He indicated the article. I looked up the article. I read the book maybe 3 or 4 times, and then one time I read the book, I looked at the page that he wrote, and then he had the names. He had the mayor of the town, he had the people who were arrested. I looked at the names, and they were names I knew. They were actually people I actually knew. I knew their families actually. So I called George. That was the first time I spoke to him. I said, "Hey, George, do you have these records? Because I believe that my grandfather was also one of the Greek thugs that they raided. because they, actually they weren't thugs, that's what they called it in a newspaper article, but they arrested like 60 people, and the article's fascinating. Go into the New York Times, February 6th, 1898, look up this article, and they say they've never seen a band of murderers, thieves, this and that, they couldn't believe it, etc. I was trying to find the records of this, so I don't talk too much. I'm going to introduce the memories by George Tselos.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank all of you for coming tonight. This program, I think, is bringing together what a number of us have been talking about recently, which I think we will be able to launch. I don't know how formal it'll be, but we'll be able to launch an effort that will not only increase consciousness about the importance of saving Greek American cultural resources, which goes beyond traditional paper archives, and assist all of these enthusiastic individuals. The institutions, in many cases, particularly if like Orthodox institutions, are doing a good job already, but there are a lot of parish people who would do more if with some encouragement. And there are individuals who are passionately saving not typical archival material, not texts of various kinds, but cultural resources related to Greek music in America. The two people whose names come to mind, and I have to say I know almost nothing about this subject, but the two people who I'm aware of who have done a great deal about it are Steve Frongos, it's a name that I think quite a number of you are familiar with, and somebody up in Boston whom I just found out about, actually, named Mileti. Anybody know? Yes, yes. Who has amassed, at this point in his basement, a gigantic collection of Greek records, that is, phonograph records, sheet music, photos of musicians, all kinds of things. That's what I say with cultural resources. It's not just traditional archives. But this kind of situation, despite the passion of the people who are doing this around the country, is fraught with some potential difficulties. If they're saving in their basement or their attic, the risks to the records over a long period of time are significant. Again, I totally agree with Alex that we don't want to approach people and say, oh, you got to give these records to it, you got to give these materials to an institution. The first thing you want to talk to them about is, given their resources, what can be done in order to try to ensure the safety of the records without telling them, oh, you have to give up your collection. I think that's a sure way to ruin somebody's passion for what they've been doing if you take that kind of an approach. But I can foresee an effort, which is what I've been talking with Alex and Nick and Lou about, to launch an effort that really has two wings to it. One is to somehow find somebody who can host a database that will cover nationwide where these materials are and their status. By their status, I mean, are they an institution? What is the access, if there is any current access to them? What is their state of preservation? That would be one thing, because if some individual is has collected a gigantic amount of material, it doesn't mean that if dozens of people who are interested in their topic descend on them, that they're going to be able to help them effectively. The other thing would be to pursue the effort that Alex and I started in vain back in the late 1980s. I think we called it the Greek American Documentation Project. And actually, to tell you the truth, I ran across some of our old leaflets, our old brochures. I meant to bring one tonight, but I had a senior slip and I forgot to take it with me for the office. But Alex was quite correct. We didn't get much of a response. The brochure also had the drawback of being almost all text, no illustrations, a lot of very small text, which certainly wouldn't encourage anybody, especially senior citizens like myself who are having trouble reading small text now. But I think an effort offering advice, friendly advice, and options. There's a great deal of information on the web now, freely available to anybody, about preserving various kinds of cultural resources and historical materials. And if we make people aware of this, they can pursue this themselves. I think we would probably need to see some kind of funding. You can't even put up a major website any longer without having some kind of funding. And clearly, Nick is well occupied already with this wonderful project that he's launched at Queens, and which I was, pleased to be able to talk to him about it at great length over the weekend. And Alex and I have been sort of in communication on and off for a long period of time about things like this. But the potential for this in terms of both making these resources better known around the country, and as Alex said, particularly if they are in an institution already, a library, an organized university library and so on, and people ask, Greek Americans ask to have access to them, this will help motivate more resources being devoted to making sure that they are available. The thing is, if you have an archives, what many people don't think about is you have to have a guide. You have to have some kind of a guide to the collection. Otherwise, you're just faced with boxes and boxes of papers. And if they haven't done an inventory, where are you going to look for whatever you're interested in? Well, we just got at Statue Ellis, in the Ellis archives, we just got 200 boxes of records from the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation, which deal with the restoration efforts in the 1980s of both the statue and the restoration of the ruined immigration station into the current museum. And we're just, they hired an archivist, and the archivist made a finding aid, and now they can't, it's been 10 years since they had the archivist, now they can't even find the finding aid. So we have to do it all over again. These efforts will bear fruit if we pursue this in an organized way. Now, I have to say, this is kind of a downer in a sense for me to have to say this to you, but the only significant Greek material that we have at the Ellis Island Archives is in our oral history collection. We have between 30 and 40 interviews with the first generation of people who came through Ellis. That's mainly our criteria. People who came through Ellis of whatever ethnic group when it was operating as an immigration station. And for the rest of it, we mostly have organizational archives. That is the engineering and construction archives for the restoration of the statue, the restoration of the Ellis Island ruined immigration station into the current museum. We don't have the records of the Naturalization Service. Those are in the National Archives. I work for the National Park Service, which is an entirely different agency that's part of the United States Department of the Interior, which is a cabinet a cabinet level position. And the situation is, no matter how much on my job I want to pursue Greek American or Greek immigration materials, there are dozens and dozens of other ethnic groups that came through Ellis Island. And they would be rather upset if it became evident that the only people I was paying attention to was the Greeks. So we have, and also our museum collection has donations of particularly Greek handicrafts, devotional items, personal items. Some of them, a good many from a single family. There's one case, exhibition case at Ellis Island devoted to one particular Greek immigrant family because they gave a great deal of material. But we have thousands and thousands and thousands of objects in the museum collection, which is not the area that I supervise, not the museum objects. But out of these thousands of objects represent every conceivable ethnic group, including some that you probably never heard of. For instance, there's a group that sent a sizable number. They self-identified, they call themselves Ruthenians. They are from what is now the Ukraine, mostly. They're from the Western Ukraine. And, but they haven't existed as a nation state as they did exist as a nation state. It was, for a very short period of time. But they had a strong self-identity. So you find materials, historical materials, referring to the Ruthenians. But the point is, we have to deal, we want to deal, it's our mission to deal with all of the various ethnic groups that came through Ellis Island, not just to single out. We have the Italians and Jewish people were the two largest groups. Remember, Ellis Island didn't start until 1892. So we were not involved with the exodus from Ireland of the people during the famine. That was before Ellis Island, decades before Ellis Island even existed. And a lot of people don't remember this, and they come and say, I'd like you to look up my ancestors who came to the United States in 1870. Well, we don't have those records, although I will say one of the things Lou was referring to was we don't have the paper copies, the original paper copies of the ship manifest, the passenger list. But they are available from several sources online, and including the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation had a selection of the data digitized and put up on their website, but it only deals with the Port of New York, but it's free. Ancestry, which has all the port records, Ancestry is a membership access organization, so if you want to get a broader base, and also it's not just passenger lists, it's hundreds of other kinds of paper documents. And we don't per se do genealogical research for people. But what we do is, if somebody calls us up and says, specifically asking about the passenger lists, I've tried to find my Greek ancestor, my Italian ancestor, whoever, and I can't find them during the Ellis Island years, or I find their name, but there's a code written by the Immigration Service inspector on the manifest, and I don't understand what this code means. Well, my staff I have to admit, my staff is a lot better informed on some of these technical details than I am. My staff can figure out almost anything that appears on the years of the Ellis Island era manifests and the abbreviations and what they mean and what happened to people and so on. A lot of people were detained, but only a small number were actually rejected. This is important to remember. The fact that your ancestor may have been detained at Ellis Island didn't mean they violated some significant law. It could be, given, for instance, the attitude towards women that was prevalent late 19th, early 20th century. If a single woman arrived at Ellis Island And particularly, well, even a married woman with children, if she arrived with her children and she had to be met by a male relative, and she had to designate who the male relative was, or the male relative had to make special arrangements before they would release her, because there was the assumption that a woman without a man to protect her or a family to go to could end up being lured into prostitution. Of course, in those days, money spoke. Also, we have a documented instance of a woman who was from the Sami Tribe in the Arctic area above the Scandinavian countries. They're often called Lapps, but they don't like the name Lapp. Their own name for themselves is Sami. They're a nomadic tribe. This woman appeared at Ellis Island unmarried with a child, which apparently wasn't all that uncommon within the tribal mores. And they were going to detain her, but she had $10,000 with her, and she was headed to Alaska to see her uncle. So they said, fine, you know, go ahead. It doesn't matter that you're not being met by your uncle at Ellis Island. So there's among the immigrants on the island, there are enormous numbers of both positive stories and sad stories of people who were rejected, people who sold all their belongings and sold their property to raise money to buy a steamship ticket. And then they got here, and somebody in the family wasn't allowed in. And if it was a child, because the child had an incurable disease, incurable at that time, trachoma, or nearly incurable, the child would be rejected, and some adult member of the family would have to return to the home country with them. Now, they did get free passage back. Congress passed a law saying if anybody was rejected, the steamship company had to take them back free. But the point is, they went back and they were penniless. They had to move in. They would have to move in with relatives. And even though this was a very small number of people, it was an incredible tragedy for any family to whom this kind of thing occurred. Most people were, if they were detained, they were just detained for a short period of time, and then they were allowed to go on. And so there's a million stories there. There's, you know, three-quarters of a million Greek stories. That's about the number of people who came through from Greece during the Ellis Island period. The Greeks were not all that big a group. The Italians had them long surpassed. The population of Italy was much higher, much denser. Jewish people, for the most part, from Eastern and Central Europe, fleeing really grotesque persecution during the late 19th and early 20th century, also made up a very large number of the immigrants. But the program that I direct there, in addition to the regular archives in the library, which is the oral history program, we have to pay attention to all of these different ethnic groups. And so the majority of the work that I've done over the years, specifically focusing on Greek American material, it's outlined on the program that Lou basically took off a Greek-oriented resume that I sent to him. The one thing which I also did, which I was very pleased I was able to do it, in the 70s, a Greek newspaper in Detroit, it's still publishing, it was a long hiatus, but it's still publishing, and if I remember correctly, I think it was Ethnico Vima, stopped publishing, and the print shop in their office was simply sitting there in an old working class district of Detroit, and it was actually noticed by Rudy Piccoli, who was the head up until his death of the, well, I think it was until his death of the Immigration History Archives that Alex mentioned in Minnesota, where my father's papers are. And the colleague got in touch with me and said, look, we saw this print shop with all these, there appeared to be large quantities of newspapers there, and can you look into this and try to do something to preserve them? So I got a hold of the publisher, and I said, look, I'm going to try to organize a preservation effort for this. So what I did was, I got 4 institutions: the Immigration History Research Center, the the Detroit Public Library, their historical collection, the Multicultural Institute up in Toronto, and at that time we also had, there was an institution in Philadelphia called the Balch Institute, another multi-ethnic institute. They suffered from having a gigantic building that they had obtained and virtually no endowment. And eventually they went out of business. And their records were transferred to another institution, which still is in Philadelphia, at least the records are being preserved. But I made the proposal to these 4 institutions, look, I will arrange the microfilming of these records. I'll hire a graduate student. I was working as an archivist at Wayne State University at the time. I'll arrange for a graduate student to collate, put all these things in order by date, and make a list of what issues we have and so on. And then I'll arrange for a top quality microfilming company to come and microfilm. Remember, this is an era before the internet and scanning really existed. And so we got a microfilm of many decades of this paper. Some was in pretty bad shape, but it came out all right on the film. And so these 4 institutions now have a run from much of the early 20th century of this newspaper. And I have to say something at this point about digitization. Digitization is wonderful, and it's critical for access. And assuming your digital files are backed up properly in multiple copies, and the backups are kept not right next to your computer. It's also great for preservation. I happen to be very old school on this. I would prefer to see a microfilm copy of everything. That can be done easily now because there's a way of using digital files to create microfilm. You don't just have to sit there and, the camera click, 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 as before. The reason I favor this is all of you, or any of you in any kind of business, or even those of you who have a home computer, know version after version after version of your software comes out and they retroactively make it compatible. But sooner or later they stop making it compatible. And with a microfilm, you can always get a flashlight and a magnifying glass, and you can read the microfilm. No software intervenes. It's an analog storage thing. I have to admit, I'm considered extremely old-fashioned whenever I say this to people, but I would always like to see preservation efforts include, after scanning, microfilm created also, which has a 500-year lifespan. And you don't have to worry about it becoming obsolete. Anyway, I thank Lou very much for inviting me, and I'm very glad you folks came, and you're going to hear an extremely interesting presentation about a very important project when Nikolas comes up to the podium.
Records are in all different types of places, as was indicated by George Tselos and certainly by Alexander. But it's up to us really to get and gather all this material together. And EMBCA, East Mediterranean Business Cultural Alliance, understands the issues that are involved, understands also the financial issues that are involved. Okay, we're here about the big picture, not the small picture. We're not interested in these collections basically disappearing. We're interested actually in what Nico is doing at Queens College, but also to expand what Nico is doing. One of the things tonight that's going to be announced, that's part of the agenda, is basically to link up the Queens College Library with the National Library of Greece. But one thing that I discussed with Nico also was that it's okay to do that, but we want to link up all these resources together. There are other Hellenic American programs and studies in different universities. We want to link all these together so we can share that particular information. There are some of us who have been here multi-generations, and a lot of this information that is there is basically not out to the general public. I basically indicated a little bit about the genealogy side, because that side of the picture is doing some heavy, heavy research in all types of records. It goes beyond Ancestry.com. They're linked to the Hellenic records. They're linked to the state records, individual state records, marriage records, etc. One of the things, by the way, Alexander, that people are very interested in is the archdiocese records. Okay? They want to know when their parents, their grandparents got married, when children were baptized, and things of that nature, and basically codify that type of information. When did we feel proud of who we were, and what changed that? What changed that was Archivist, actually. It was a shock in Europe that the only was the first time that the Nazis or the fascist powers were stopped anywhere in Europe was in fact by Greece itself, that small little country. We were the only ones. Before that period, go into the Hellenic American history and see how we were regarded. See how in the past our stores were burned down. See how in fact we were targeted, in fact, and those brothers who are sitting here with regards to AHEPA, by the KKK. In the 1920s, many of the representatives in the Congress and in the Senate were in fact KKK members. When the election took place in 1922, for example, they would hand out leaflets that talked about blacks, they talked about Jews, and in particular what annoyed them, and you have to read the literature, and you know the literature, the Greeks ticked them off. They hated the Greeks. Why did they hate the Greeks? Number one, they felt they were people of color. We were a people of color. The other thing was we were very successful, and that really annoyed them. So a lot of the stores were burned down, a lot of different things happened, negativity about our people, Orchidee took place, and then all of a sudden, you know, who are you? You're a Greek? You were fantastic. I'm a product of that. When I was a young person going to school, I was very proud of being Greek. Everybody's going, oh, you're Greek, this and that. You felt very good about it, and all of us feel very good. So what's taking place right now? What happened when AHEPA was formed in the 1920s? Right now we have a situation where we're targeted as a people, where internationally we're targeted, and we can't say we're not involved with Greece. We can't say that we are going to listen to the concepts of the lazy Greek. We're not going to tolerate those things. So part of the mission of AHEPA, for example, will be to, in fact, to look at what took place in 1920s when we formed AHEPA as a counteracting to the KKK and all these negativities that took place, the burning down of our stores, okay, the negating of a lot of our licenses all over the country. And I see this as an international KKK right now that's taking place. So I want us to look at that also as an issue of what we're talking about tonight. We're not here to talk about that, of course, tonight, but that's an issue that we're going to pursue into the following scenario. We are here tonight, of course, to discuss the archives. I'm very happy that the Prime Minister is here, because one of the things that we want to do is, as you know, Professor Alexiou is going to start what they call the Hellenic American Project and Experience, where they're going to take a section of the library at Queens College and dedicate it to Hellenic American Studies. There's going to be a linkage with the National Library of Greece. But one of the things that we talked about before you came here was, in fact, to go beyond the Queens College experience, but through the Queens College experience, to link up all the libraries, all the Hellenic American archives that we have, so they'll be available to the people, because there's a thirst in this country right now for their history, for their background in terms of the country. The other thing is that in terms of the genealogy conferences and in terms of economics, there are thousands and thousands of people who are going to Greece, basically, to learn about their backgrounds and their histories. And even though we don't talk about it in a tourism state, but we're going to have something with the tourist group at the consulate, is we have to promote that very thing. So I did this as an introduction just to make sure that you got it okay. So with that, I'm going to introduce a good friend that we've done a lot of projects together. I did indicate to Niko that this project, when he started to mention it, we basically changed this particular discussion. And I'm happy to announce that and going back to your point, George, I'm happy to announce that we will give, I will personally give, and EMBCA will give, 5 $1,000 scholarships and grants to Queens College, so we can do research on what we talked about earlier in terms of the shipping that we're going to do in November. The students to start gathering all the information in terms of the archival information that exists throughout the United States. Professor Alexiou.
Honorable Prime Minister, thank you for coming here today. I know you had a very long day today. You started in Astoria, and we as professors have some books for you. First, Alexandros, Professor Kitoeff wants to give you something about Panathinaikos. And because that wasn't the first time that the Prime Minister was in Astoria, not long ago he was there and we worked, we ate, and he's very familiar. So I would like to give you the only and first poetry collection, my poetry collection, which is called Astoria.
All I want to say is thank you very much. I'm very lucky to meet Greek Americans today in Astoria, tonight in this very important event. I'm very happy to be here among you, and I want to say that I don't know if this is a child, but it's very, very important for me because it's my favorite team now. The only I want to say is that today, in the morning in the school, and tonight I'm seeing people that love Greece. And this is very significant for me because we live thousands of miles away from Greece. But sometimes you think and you live with these thoughts more than after you leave Greece. And I believe that this is very important, and it's so important to support our efforts to recover. Our country was in a difficult position all these years. I believe that we tried to overcome the crisis with our people in dignity, not without difficulties. We are trying to pass in very difficult circumstances, but the message is that we're here, we're trying, we're fighting for our ideas, for our values, for our principles, and with your supporting, we'll manage to overcome the difficulties. In the UN, the 3 issues that we mentioned was about the refugee crisis, financial crisis and the security crisis that are the three parallel crises in Europe. And I'm proud to say that, especially in the refugee crisis, we managed to show the humane face of Europe. Beyond the fact that Greece was in a very difficult situation. And especially the Greek people, the people of the citizens of our islands, they tried and managed to show the humane face in difficult circumstances beyond the fact that we're in 6 years of recession and poverty is built up. But this is for us, our heritage. And I'm very proud about that. Our heritage. There is a special word without translation in English. Philotimo. This is the only Greek word, maybe the only without translation. So I believe that this is a strong message. This is a message for Greece, but this is a message for the global community. That the Greek people were there in difficult times. They managed to show the humane face of Europe, but at the same time, some others in Europe, maybe some others with more rich than us, they built fences and walls in order to protect themselves from these refugees, because they believe that these people are dangerous. And I want to say that to you, because I don't know if you personally, but for sure your parents or your grandfathers were migrants and refugees. And they managed here in America, in US, to build their life. Some of them, you became very important people in your society. Professor in university, or very important people in politics or in entrepreneur. And the message is that Greece is not only famous for its past, for our civilization, for Platonas and Aristoteles, but it's also famous because of its people, because of its people dignity and its people values. This is the message that we try to send all these days in UN Assembly. And the message to you is that we're proud to be here, and that we're proud that even from kilometers, miles away, you support Greece and you support Greek people. Thank you very much.
Queen's College is here today. My graduate students are here. And some of my undergraduate students make members of the administration of the and I'm very proud of them. And not all of them are of Greek heritage, but definitely they wanted to be here to listen about the archives and also the chance to see a leader who represents the democracy in Europe. Today is the first day of autumn, but Prime Minister Tsipras brought the Greek spring in New York. And thank you very much for this. Because also doing research is a demand for democracy. Doing oral history is not an easy thing, especially with this Greek American community, which is successfully in many other aspects, except having a cultural vision. And culture is basically related to memory. And oral history, it is the ability to find a chance to collect those memories. As far as concerned the subjectivity of those social realities, or the myths and tales people say, also myths, tales, subjectivity, they also have their own objectivity. And this is the part of what researchers do. And this is what I say to my students. The facts never speak for themselves. You need the researcher to give the language and be critical to power, to elite groups, etc. So doing research is about democracy. And the fact that we want to have our institution, Queen's College, to host the Greek American immigration experience and the American-born Americans, and now with the Prime Minister present and all the efforts that the Minister of Education does to connect, to link Queen's College and Greek Americans with the archives of the Hellenic Republic or the National Library of Greece shows, it's a real example of the interest that the Greek government shows with homogeneity, with the community, and we appreciate. And with that, excuse me, but I would like to say good night to you for tonight. I know that you have still things to do, and you have our love and support. Thank you very much.
Η παρουσία του Πρωθυπουργού εδώ έδειξε και έμπρακτα το ενδιαφέρον που έχει τόσο ο ίδιος, αλλά και στο σύνολό της η κυβέρνηση να συνδεθεί ακόμα περισσότερο με την ομογένεια. Αυτό που σήμερα ανακοινώσαμε, ότι θα γίνεται και ηλεκτρονική σύνδεση με την Εθνική Βιβλιοθήκη, με τα αρχεία του κράτους, με τη Βιβλιοθήκη της Βουλής, με μερικές άλλες βιβλιοθήκες που έχουν να κάνουν με θέματα ελληνικής μετανάστευσης, δείχνει ακριβώς αυτό το πράγμα. Δείχνει ότι είναι η κατάλληλη στιγμή για περισσότερη σύνδεση συστηματική, επιστημονική μεταξύ της ομογένειας και της Ελλάδος. Και αυτό εξέφρασε η παρουσία σήμερα του Πρωθυπουργού εδώ, που παρά το πολύ φορτισμένο πρόγραμμά του βρήκε το χρόνο να έρθει και να στηρίξει την εκδήλωση, το αρχείο και την βιβλιοθήκη επουδημονισμού που κάνουμε στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Queen's College, που είναι ένα δημόσιο πανεπιστήμιο και που φιλοξενεί και τόσους πολλούς Ελληνοαμερικανούς φοιτητές. Έχει μια παράδοση στον ελληνισμό του Queen's College και νομίζω ότι ήταν πάρα πολύ σωστή αυτή η παρέμβαση του Πρωθυπουργού σήμερα εδώ.
Η απόψινή εκδήλωση ήταν αφιερωμένη στη συλλογή και στην καταγραφή των αρχείων και των τεκμηρίων της ελληνοαμερικάνικης εμπειρίας. Ξέρουμε πάρα πολύ καλά ότι όταν ένας, όπως λένε, όταν ένας λαός ξεχνάει το παρελθόν του, δεν έχει παρόν και δεν έχει μέλλον. Σήμερα είναι μια προσπάθεια. Εγώ μίλησα συγκεκριμένα για τις προσπάθειες που γίνονται για τη συλλογή αρχείων σε άλλα μέρη των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών και το κάθε μέρος έχει το δικό του τρόπο. Κατά κάποιο τρόπο η προσπάθεια του Νίκου στο Queen's College είναι από τις πιο συγκροτημένες και οργανωμένες, αλλά νομίζω και οι άλλες έχουν την αξία τους και ο σκοπός εδώ είναι να υπάρχει ένας συντονισμός, μια συνεργασία. Ο Τζόρτζ, ο οποίος ξέρει τους κανόνες και τα πρωτόκολλα, γιατί δεν μπορείς όλα τα αρχεία να τα βγάζεις στη φόρα. Να υπάρχει δηλαδή ένας συντονισμός και μια συνεργασία, με απότερο σκοπό βέβαια να ψηφοποιηθούν όλα αυτά για να υπάρχει και ένα κεντρικό μέρος που να υπάρχουν. Οπότε αυτό συζητήσαμε σήμερα, δηλαδή τη διαφορά τις διάφορες προσπάθειες σε όλη την Αμερική, τι πλούσιες ιδέες που έχουν, είναι δημιουργικά όλα αυτά, από το μεράκι τους, πολλοί κόσμος δεν είναι ακαδημαϊκοί, δεν είναι από μόνο τους, το πονάνε το πράγμα, αυτό συζητήσαμε. Το Queen's College βέβαια προηγείται κατά κάποιο τρόπο, οι άλλοι ακολουθούν, αλλά νομίζω με ένα πνεύμα συνεργασίας.
Κύριε Αλεξάνδρου, ναι, βέβαια, συμφωνώ και με αυτά που είπαν οι ομιλητές πριν από μένα, και σίγουρα η έρευνα είναι ένα δημόσιο αγαθό, είναι για να συνεργάζονται οι άνθρωποι και αυτό προσπαθούμε να κάνουμε άλλωστε. Ο Tselos που είναι τόσο έμπειρος με όλα αυτά, έχει η πρότασή του να συνδεθούμε και με τα άλλα αρχεία του, to join with the other archives. This is a fantastic idea, an impressive collaboration you had so many years ago. Maybe now is a good moment.
Yes, I think it is.
For this. Έτσι. Ναι, βέβαια, και αυτό κάποια στιγμή. Γιατί και εγώ αυτό διαπίστωσα, σαν κοινωνιολόγος, διαπίστωσα ότι υπάρχει ένα κενό όσον αφορά την ελληνική κοινότητα. Δεν υπήρχαν μετά από 150 χρόνια διαρκούς παρουσίας δεν υπάρχει ένα συγκεκριμένο αρχείο που να μπορεί να είναι εύκολο στην πρόσβαση και αξιοποιήσιμο. Και επιτέλους γι' αυτό και το κάνουμε. Και τώρα θα επεκταθεί και άλλο με τη βοήθεια και άλλων επιστημόνων. Και βέβαια και με έναν κόσμο όπως ακούστηκε σήμερα που θα δώσουν κάποιες υποτροφίες, γιατί αυτά δεν πρέπει να μένουν ανεμικατάλευτα. Πρέπει να δοθεί και ένα κίνητρο στα παιδιά τα οποία είναι Αμερικανοί ελληνικής καταγωγής. Πρέπει να δώσει ένα κίνητρο να ενδιαφερθούν και αυτά. Έτσι. Και έτσι μπαίνει σε μια άλλη επιστημονική βάση για την έρευνα. Και με τη σύνδεση με τα αρχεία της Ελλάδος, της ελληνικής βιβλιοθήκης ή τα αρχεία του κράτους, γίνεται ακόμα πιο εύκολο και συνδέεται και η Ελλάδα με την ομογένεια περισσότερο. Και η διατήρηση της κουλτούρας, όπως είπα, είναι αστηρά συνδεμένη με τη μνήμη. Αυτή η μνήμη όμως πρέπει κάπου να καταγραφεί.
Στις χορηγίες είναι η βάση.
Που αυτό ήταν και ένα πρόβλημα της αμερικάνικης κοινότητας. Και αυτό ήθελα να θίξω στην ομιλία μου, ότι αυτά έχουν να κάνουν και με θέματα εξουσίας. Γιατί να μην θέλουν τόσα χρόνια να κάνουν αυτές τις επενδύσεις, ενώ είναι μια κοινότητα που έχει ανωδική πορεία. Και οικονομική και κοινωνική.
One thing that I didn't have a chance to say, which I'm going to say to Nick, is I'm going to donate copies of our Greek oral histories to your archives also. The releases allow us to do this. So you'll be getting 35 additional oral histories.